Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Secession Monday. I am your host, Ro, giving you the latest and everything Hunter x Hunter Secession War arc. And today, this is the final episode of our preemptive series, where we pretty much analyze all the governments that are most important within the Hunter x Hunter world before we dive into the other discussions that will be important enough to understand the secession war arc. Today's last government discussion will be all about the U.S.S. So, have you ever wondered particularly about the U.S.S. and about the governments that both hold the cities of York New and Glam Glassland, aka their version of New York City and Las Vegas, Nevada, or just Nevada in general? Well, we're going to talk a bit more about that. And we're really going to understand the breakdown of this government, and then later how this government may have a bigger impact on the other historical events that have happened within Hunter x Hunter. There's quite a lot of conversations that we're going to have later on in this series where this government is going to be pretty integral within those conversations. So I really want you to understand, my council members, this particular government and everything that we are going to be discussing with them, because the U.S.S. is pretty much just their version of the United States of America. So I really want you to understand what is essentially the U.S. government and every little nuance about it, but we're going to be talking about the basics today. We won't really go too deep into it today, but you'll at least have a good enough framework to where later in our conversations, we'll understand where a lot of this started with, right? It's like where a lot of this originates from and where the framework begins. So I'm going to be explaining that with you today and a couple of other things, and I hope that you enjoy this conversation. Now, let's get into the first part of our discussion today, which is pretty much explaining what type of government that the USS has. Now, the USS, which is pretty much their version of the USA, has a constitutional federal republic. What is that, right? That's a lot of words for Elmo. That's a lot of big words for Elmo. What are you talking about? I'm about to get into it, all right? A constitutional federal republic is a type of government in which the laws are based on a constitution that is supposed to provide a framework for how federal and state governments are structured, as well as set limits on their power. In order for it to be federal, there is both a national government and a government within all 50 states. A republic is also a form of government in which the people hold power but elect representatives exercise said power of the people. In other words, the representatives represent the people. Ideally, if you've paid any attention to US politics nowadays, you can clearly see that is not happening anymore. I would argue at all, but emphasis on anymore for now. Okay? Yeah, and you also have the branches. What are these set limits to power, right? What keeps things in line? We have a thing here in the US, ideally, that's supposed to be the checks and balances. I'm going to tell you what they are, right? We have the judicial branch, we have the executive branch, and we have the legislative branch, right? Judicial branch is the Supreme Court, which is appointed by the president, who's the executive branch, but is subject to consent of the U.S. Senate. That is the legislative branch. So let me break this down again. Supreme Court, judicial. The President, executive. The U.S. Senate, legislative branch. Glad we got that across. Likewise, the judiciary branch can strike down unconstitutional laws that are passed by the Congress, legislative branch, and is then given to the president to either be signed and or vetoed depending on what those laws are, right? With this system in place, what is supposed to happen, right, is say the legislative branch writes a certain law. It gets passed down to the judicial branch to check if it's constitutional or not. Once it's passed as constitutional, it's then given to the executive branch to either be finalized, so signed or vetoed. The executive branch is the finalization stage. That's ideally what's supposed to happen. Again, if you paid any attention to US politics nowadays, that's not what's happening anymore. And I'm gonna be honest, it's a frustrating thing to see. And it's not only frustrating, it is, as you can clearly see nowadays, dangerous. It's a very dangerous precedent that this is no longer happening. Now, US politics as a whole had its flaws to begin with, but once again, I must emphasize, as we can clearly see, those checks and balances no longer being seen or as seen as it should be, right? So it's very corrupted nowadays. Things are not working in the way that is safe for the people. Yeah, but that's what's supposed to be happening. Fresh reminder, since that's not what's happening in the current day, and it's terrifying for all of us. Now, how is the state and local governments tend to interact with one another, right? So now we also have state and local governments as well. So there are currently issues with the federal government, but I'm also going to explain the state and local governments. In other words, the government that I have been discussing when it has come to the 50 states portion. So, what do I mean by that? Well, each state has its own constitution as well, and these are called provisions. So, the local governments at hand has their own provisions within the state. May include cities, counties, towns, school districts, and special purpose districts in which govern such matters such as local natural resources, transportation services, child welfare, list goes on. So that's what the state and local governments tend to do, right? So state, local tends to handle things that are more so state matters, right? That are specific to that region and part of the US because of how big it is, right? So we have tiny itty bitty governments for each state, and then we have federal, which pretty much are laws in which maintain the whole entire nation. So we have a mix of the two. So that is the basic framework of the type of government in which the U.S.S., which is their version of the USA, even has. Now, in this next portion, we're also going to be talking about the Constitution and how that works, because you need to understand the Constitution because it's a huge part of it, considering it's a constitutional federal republic. Ideally, keyword on ideally, and you need to understand how that works before we get into the other things for this episode. All right, now let's get into explaining the Constitution and the basic framework of what that is. So, the role of the Constitution. See, the U.S. Constitution is supposed to be the blueprint for the American system of government that was ratified way back in 1788. See, the Constitution defines three separate branches of government, which again, very important. You're going to hear about these three branches a lot: legislative, executive, and judicial branch. Please remember this. Okay, write this down if you have to. Those are three very importante branches. That's the rule of the Constitution. It's this paper, right? And it's pretty much the paper in which we're supposed to follow. Within that Constitution, there's amendments. You heard of the First Amendment, freedom of speech, Second Amendment, right to bear arms, and all these other amendments that you heard of. Yeah, that's where it came from. It came from the Constitution. Following on that fact, the Constitution has all of those within. Not only does it have all of those rules within, the thing about the Constitution is it's supposed to be updated. So those amendments are supposed to be updated, right? The rights for women to vote was added in, the rights for essentially, it's a lot of voting within the Constitution as well. But the thing that keeps being forgotten, I should say, is that it's supposed to be updated every 10 years or so, I believe is the number of years in which it's supposed to be updated. Yeah, we have not updated it in a long time. So that's another flaw within the U.S.S, which you'll see, which is pretty much just the United States of America. So that's another flaw. We have not updated that Constitution in years, like at all. We did not update it for the modern day. So that's another issue. But the Constitution is there to pretty much, establish and make sure that we're following the laws and whatnot. Mind you, those laws that were given for the Constitution was meant for essentially 18th century America, and a lot of it needs to be renewed. It has not. So here we are. Isn't it wonderful? No, it's not. Not wonderful at all, if I do say so myself. Let's continue on, right? If I do say so myself. It's a journey. It's about the journey. It's about the climb. My goodness. My goodness. Okay. So, another thing that you need to know, now that you understand at least somewhat the basics of the Constitution and what it's supposed to be. So again, to reiterate, the Constitution is essentially the blueprint, ideally, for the American system. It's this paper that has amendments and it pretty much has rules to follow beforehand, and it was ratified in 1788. Got it? Got it. Good. Something else you need to know about federal republics before we move on to our other subjects is that federal republics are uncommon. See, for most of the world's political systems, republics are by name only, and we don't have a lot of republics in the world. I know, shocking. Those in which a single party or a very small group of people are actually in charge might still call themselves republics, but only those that vest sovereignty with the people are true republics. The U.S. has not done that. So I'm going to be getting into why I keep saying ideally so much, because it claims to be a republic, how it claims to be this form of democracy. It is not at all. See, I need you to dissolve such illusions in your heads, council members, for it is not the complete truth of what the U.S. is. Another thing to know about republics is that large, geographically and culturally diverse countries are more likely to have said systems, federal systems in general, but most other countries do not. So, republics are rare. That is another thing to keep in mind. Federalism is not a common governing system of the nearly 200 countries in the world. See, only about 24 divide power and sovereignty between a central government and subordinate governments, aka the governments of the states, and or provisions, depending on where you're from, states, because we're talking about the United States. So in addition to the United States, other federal systems include Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Nigeria, India, and Germany, at least to name a few. The vast majority of other countries rely on a unitary system of government, in which the central government is much more powerful than the subordinate or state governments at hand, and that is if that country even has state governments to begin with. However, I keep talking about federal republics, but you're probably wondering, dear council member, why I keep saying the word ideally. And it's not what it's supposed to be. Well, then, what is the U.S. government really if it's not running like the federal republic that it's supposed to be running? My dear council members, I fear that the U.S. runs more like an oligarchy rather than a federal republic, which we will be getting into in my next section. For right now, we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back from the break, we're going to have a very long, maybe not too long, but somewhat long discussion as to the illusion and mask of the Federal Republic falling off and the U.S. actually being an oligarchic hellscape. It is quite an interesting nation in which the U.S. is. But before we get into all of that and somewhat confuse your brain, we're going to take a quick break. This podcast is sponsored by Mantra Matcha. My dear council members, Mantra Matcha is a premium ceremonial matcha that is made from the finest, youngest tea leaves. And it offers the highest quality of leaves that has sweet, smooth taste to it. Yeah, delicious. With 137 times the antioxidants of green tea, it offers great health benefits like improving your heart health and boosting your metabolism, with delicious flavors such as banana cacao and strawberry matcha. So you either get that chocolatey sensation or a strawberry matcha taste. Me personally, I love adding in oat milk to my matcha, so it's like a strawberry matcha mixed in with vanilla. Just absolutely tantalizing flavors. You can enjoy it hot, iced, or however else you like it. And you can also enjoy it right next to your table or however else you like to enjoy these tea talks in the morning. So you get a delicious breakfast and you get to listen to our wonderful, insightful words on here today on this tea talk. 15% off for any of your purchase. My counsel will go straight to you as a council member. These are all great benefits, my counsel. So not only are you getting to listen to these insightful words, you also get 15% off on the Mantra Matcha. So your tea is very inexpensive, or at least I hope it is, with 15% off of this great quality product. You get a great discount. You get a lovely breakfast. You get to hear these insightful words and more of my fair amount of wisdom, or however else you like to enjoy this podcast. And another important thing is that you are also helping those in need. For all of the funds that are provided for this purchase will also go to providing meals to children through the No Kid Goes Hungry Fund / Charity Act. So you will be helping kids, you'll be getting a great breakfast, you'll be listening to this wonderful, insightful podcast. I declare this a win-win-win, council members. So please, go on and enjoy your favorite matcha right now. So go to mantramatcha.com. That is spelled MANTRA, matcha.com, and use the code ANALYSIS to get your delicious matcha today. All right, to my council members, and now let us go back to our regular scheduled programming. I'll see you soon. Hello, council. I hope you enjoyed that break. Let's get back into it. So you're probably wondering all this time why I keep saying ideally or supposed to be. Well, that's because the constitutional federal republic that the U.S. claims to be is absolutely a lie. It is an oligarchy / plutocracy. And you're probably wondering, what is an oligarchy and is it that bad? Yes and yes. An oligarchy is something that I'll explain right here, right now. For you see, an oligarchy is a form of government in which the power resides with a small elite group of individuals, often distinguished by wealth, family ties, corporate influence, military control, or political power. See, that sounds a bit more familiar. That is the US that we're seeing nowadays. All this time, they wanted to act better than. They wanted to act like the world's superhero, but it's not. Matter of fact, the US in and of itself is also an empire. That's right, the U.S.S. is an empire just like the Khakan Empire. So when we get into the discussions of imperialism, this nation will stand right beside the Khakan Empire for all of the flaws that exist within the Hunter universe, and as an extension, ours as well. See, the etymology of what an oligarchy is, it's a pretty simple breakdown. The word comes from the Greek oligos, which means few, and archos, which means ruler, meaning ruled by a few. So even in that very simple explanation, it's clear to see that the US is run more like a pyramid scheme than anything else. See, up top of the pyramid, it's not even the presidents. No, 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 no. We are run more so by billionaire execs. If anything, money talks in this country, and you can manipulate anything, including politics, if you have the money for it. And when I mean the money for it, I don't mean your typical millionaire. No, 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 no. Multi-billion and what? One of them is about to become a trillionaire? I swear to you, the corruption which this world exhibits, it just runs my mind into a spiral every single day. Trillionaire? We are not angry enough. The key characteristics of an oligarchy is the concentration of power, for one. And what this basically means is that you have power that is limited to a small ruling class that is often unelected. Those billionaire execs that I've been talking about is the concentration of power. See, that's where the real power is, ladies and gentlemen. Lobbying is another huge thing when it comes to US politics. You can manipulate any political party if you have enough money and power. Yeah? So if you're wondering, it's like, well, I'm voting, but it doesn't seem like enough. I have two answers for you for that. The Electoral College and lobbying is probably the real reason why you feel so powerless, right? We'll get into what lobbying means in a couple episodes later, but just know that that is why you might not feel as great as you're supposed to if you are an American like me, and according to the Hunter x Hunter universe, if you're a Saheretan, like one of the characters in which I'm currently analyzing. Number two, we have wealth-based control, which is the elites dominate resources, policy, and access to institutions. And no, this will not be in your greater favor because for the most part, they will do anything and everything to keep the power aligned to them. If you're wondering why certain things are working against you, that is because there are systemic issues that are manufactured to be there to power the elites and not you, the people at mind. There's also limited participation, which is the majority have little or no say in the majority of political decisions, which might also be the reason that, again, you as an American and according to the Hunter x Hunter universe as a Saharitan, why you might feel so powerless. It's not your fault. It's not. And I know it may seem like your fault because there's also such a thing as rugged individualism, right? We are literally taught as an American that most, if not all, of our actions is based on us as an individual, right? That, oh, systemic issues pretty much just don't exist. Pull yourself by the bootstraps. That mentality is a lie, and it is a lie given to you so that you can keep your eyes covered and blinded while the elites steal from you. That is exactly what this system is. And on top of it being an oligarchy, it is also combined with a plutocracy, which is a type of government that is effectively allows only wealthy people to rule, which can result in policies exclusively designed to assist the wealthy. We see this especially in today's politics. It's just out the bag now. It's always kind of been this way, but it's gotten exceedingly worse. And I don't know if worse is even the right word. Maybe the proper word should be more honest, right? Back in the day, there used to be taxes that were given to the wealthy. There were a lot more philanthropists back then. And that isn't saying that the wealthy were these great people back then, but it is to say that there were more incentives to give back to the towns, to give back to the people. It seemed like the taxes were going towards the people. That time no longer exists. The wealthy are getting more exceedingly wealthy. Have you heard? Someone's about to become a trillionaire if they haven't already been one. I don't know if the next time that I appear on my podcast, I'm going to have to unfortunately announce that we have a trillionaire now. That should frustrate you. The distribution of wealth is insane. We don't have any, to put it very simply. It's the divide of wealth, if I can be more so proclaimed. The middle class is a dying class. It seems to be more like the wealthy versus everybody else. That is a sentiment that you've been hearing over and over again because it's a sentiment that's becoming more truer and truer and true by the day. The constitutional federal republic that the U.S. claims to be is a lie. But of course it's a lie. The U.S. is an empire. And I emphasize that, right? The U.S.S, according to the Hunter x Hunter universe, being an empire is because empires are run by exploitation. Keep this in mind, council members. It's run by exploitation. Other nations suffer. Even the people from within said empires suffer. But the elites are eating good because that's how empires are. That's exactly the way that it was built. More for me, aka the elites, and less for thee, aka the average person like you and me. I mean, it's absolutely disappointing, but it's not surprising. And it's disappointing because while you're suffering and you're dealing with whether or not you'll get your basic needs met, you have these elites in mind who not only revel in the cruelty of you, right? For example, we talked about the Kakin Empire and we talked about one of the games, quote unquote, that they play, which is actually just making sure that their civilians suffer while they laugh at the suffering. The U.S.S. does the same thing. Maybe in a quote unquote more so subtle way, though nowadays that subtlety is gone. But the cruelty is there. A country built upon slavery and subjugation is a country that is evil. So, of course, there's violence. Of course, there are tears amongst the streets. Screams of people to be regarded as equal. That is what happens when your nation is an empire. But the good news that I can say is that empires have revolutions and empires eventually fall. So, let that be the little piece of hope that you may need for the upcoming years and days. And when we talk about the U.S.S. more, I'm going to be talking about the connections that they have to a lot of Hunter x Hunter historical events, including a very popular massacre that we have been talking about within this fandom. I'm going to be talking about a very detailed theory that I have in the upcoming Secession Monday podcast episodes. But before I go, I want to talk about one more thing, and that is the quotes around the U.S. being a plutocracy. See, I'm not the only one that noticed this. This is not a new discovery that I'm saying to you guys. This is something that has been analyzed within the U.S. government for years on end. One of the quotes is from President Theodore Roosevelt, and he said, "Of all forms of tyranny, the least attractive and the most vulgar is the tyranny of mere wealth, the tyranny of a plutocracy." And every day we recognize that that is what the U.S. has become. But another thing to mention is another quote here. And that is from the author and former Harvard Business School professor, David Horton. And he believed that plutocracy, which describes any situation in the United States, far more accurately than the term democracy. We have been an empire ruled as a plutocracy since our founding, and I couldn't agree more. This is the structure in which the U.S.S. This is also the reason why that one event, the bum incident that I talked about when I talked about Meteor City, that's why it happened. Because people who are considered lesser than the elites are considered trash, to be disregarded. It's an exact mirror as to how we treat the homeless and the impoverished within a nation. They're seen as essentially a bludgeon, a bruise, a stain upon the empire. But at the same time, the empire has those people existing because their needs are not being met and instead given more and more to the elites as if they don't have enough. It's incredibly upsetting, I know, but it's also just the mere truth. But again, empires fall. It's not something that is a sustainable system. A system built on exploitation has a limit, a time limit. It crumbles, it falls, and then either something better or worse replaces it. But it always ends up being replaced. I don't know what that replacement will be, and to be honest, the forthcoming days in which the U.S. empire falling amongst the real world and the U.S.S. may be falling within the Hunter universe, it's only a matter of when, is something that I am nervous for and maybe hopeful for. As we continue with this analyzation, we will be talking more and more about the U.S.S.'s role, the Kakin Empire's role as empires amongst the Hunter x Hunter universe, and now they have impacted major historical events. How, in all actuality, when you really sit and think about it, they are the main villains, right? We talked about the antagonists that we have dealt with before, but nothing compares as a villain more than the government itself. So I hope that's something that, think about throughout these analyzations. There is no more of a bigger villain than systematic corruption. And that is the overlying message for today's podcast and for future podcast episodes later on. I hope that you have a good day, council members. And I know for the ending, it's a bit unusual considering you have never heard that tone from me, but it's not the first time that you're going to hear me talk about this in this particular fashion because this is serious. Okay? This is one of the few moments in which you have to pay attention to your media. Because so often, media, but art especially, is a reflection of what goes on in the world. How you analyze said reflection is entirely based on you and how you see the world. And if your analysis is not as full as it should be, then you need to expand your mindset. Before we leave today, my counsel, there's one more thing that we should mention, which is manga evidence / how does this apply within the manga itself. We are going to be using the pre-canon manga for Hisoka, and this is how this is going to mix in with the Hisoka analysis as well. So the location of Glam Glassland, as we recognize, is essentially their version of Las Vegas, Nevada, or Nevada in general. In their world, a city in the northern part of the European continent, so North America for them, to the northeast of York New City, which is their version of New York, is pretty much the location of Nevada. And with Glam Glassland specifically, this kind of mixes in with Las Vegas, Nevada, but we can also say the entire state of Nevada as a whole. Now, how is their version of Nevada, aka Glam Glassland, maintained is going to be the exact same as Nevada in general / Las Vegas in general, aka Clark County for us. I'm not sure how they do counties over there in the Hunter x Hunter universe, but we are going to be using ours, which is Clark County for now. So, there is such a thing as county governments. So for Nevada, each county, which is territorial divisions within a state, and ranges in sizes from either under 100 square feet kilometers to around 200,000 square kilometers. So it's either a small county or a large county. For example, I live in Mecklenburg County within North Carolina. So that means that I live in a pretty large county region. Mecklenburg County stretches pretty far and wide, even into like some of the Kannapolis region, aka Concord. So it's a pretty large county. For Clark County, I'm pretty sure it's also considered a fairly large county, and it ranges. Not sure it's its exact size, but it's large and it's a county as well. If we were to go to maybe a smaller county, I live in North Carolina, a small county, for example, would be somewhere within like the Fayettevilles and the Clintons, regions like that. I forgot the Pacific region's name. There's one region I'm thinking of. I'm pretty sure I pronounced it incorrectly right about now. Is it Clayton? It's one of those regions. But the Fayettevilles and nations such as that, or the regions such as that, I should say, are pretty much the smaller counties within North Carolina. And for Nevada, I'm pretty sure they have smaller counties as well. And one of the more larger counties is that of Clark County, which is its most popular county as well, and Mecklenburg being a popular county in North Carolina. It's not always the case that your largest county is your most popular, but those are two examples of a larger county that's also fairly popular amongst the state. So you have that going on, and you have the counties, so you now know what it is. So you also have its major functions, right? And the major functions for a county include record keeping. So this is pretty much like you want to know about your birth certificate or your social security number. This is where the counties are very important. You also have things like births, deaths, land transfers. So again, the records. Another thing is administration of elections, which includes voter registration, construction, maintenance of local and rural roads. So it's like, where's all our tax money going? It's supposed to go to your roads, to your buildings, make sure they're maintaining the county, right? That's more of a state thing. You also have the maintenance of local and rural areas in general, zoning, building code enforcement, and law enforcement. Each county, for example, has its own little law enforcement, right? So, for example, within California, there's Orange County. Orange County would have its little own police department. For Charlotte, we have the CMPD. So that's our little police department. Clark County will have theirs. So essentially within Glam Glassland, they will have their own little police department. I'm not sure if it's called Clark County. It's probably called Lark County if we're gonna, use the rules of Hunter x Hunter. But Clark/Lark County, depending on how Tagashi wants to name it, would have its own itty bitty police department. Each county has its own little police department, and it has its own zoning laws, building code enforcement, which tends to combine with the federal law, so a lot of the times it combines with it, but it has its own little thing as well. So you have that going on, and then you also share responsibilities again with the federal government. So you'll have combined laws and rules for the federal when it comes to things like social benefits. Low income residents have social benefits typically, so whenever we have stuff that goes on, which is, for example, things involving healthcare, right? It's like Medicaid and Medicare, that tends to be a combination of not only a state kind of enforcement or a state kind of ruling or your county, right? It's like you have to call your county to make sure that everything's in line and in order when it comes to Medicaid and Medicare, but it tends to align with what's going on federally, right? That's why, for example, one of the news announcements for the U.S. was that Medicare, Medicaid, and things of that nature, so essentially one of those social benefits involving health, was going to be cut off. Because again, the elites keep wanting to feed off of the exploitation of others. So it was going to be cut off. And I believe that cutoff got delayed, I'm pretty sure. Not sure if they're going to go through with it completely, but it got delayed as of recent. Thank the stars. That was monstrous. But it was cut off for a short amount of time, and then it got reinstated, and now it's currently delayed. I'm not sure if it's going to, do this again. See, one of the things you have to keep in mind or keep in notion when it comes to U.S. politics is it's going to go back and forth. It's like a tug of war. It's annoying, very annoying, very much so a tug of war. But that's just one example amongst many others. You also have TANF. List goes on to the many social benefits that are supposed to be provided to low income residents in order to keep afloat and stay stable. I would say that for a lot of these benefits, it's very, what's the right word, unstable in and of itself. It doesn't really do that much, right? And I would argue that, a lot of the time, maybe not all the time, when Medicare, for example, is provided, it does its job. But other things, such as, other forms of monetary gain, TANF, maybe certain other bills and things of that nature. What is it? FEMA, as another example. FEMA especially does kind of a bad job as far as like social benefits goes. There is a whole bunch of documentaries, but we'll probably talk more about that council members in a minute. Yeah, it's a push and pull. It's a tug of war when it comes to that. But that's another thing that essentially the county is supposed to provide. Another thing is child welfare, and then you have other sort of duties that tend to be applied that mixes in with what the federal government is doing, along with the state government. So, a hint of this working within the manga in and of itself is that one of the small indicators is the current head of the Glam clan. So, this would be considered a mayor, right? So, they call it the head of Glam clan because Tagashi is Japanese. So, the naming of certain leaders are going to be different, but essentially their version of a mayor and the authority of Glam Glassland, aka their mayor, is shown in page 45 in the pre-canon manga. I say the naming is different. This isn't to say that Tagashi doesn't know anything at all, but it's the name that's different. But everything else is still the same. It's mayor slash leader of the clan. Just know that that means mayor, right? It's like obviously translation differences. This has more so to do with the translation difference of the Japanese language rather than, misinformation. This has nothing to do with that, right? It's like, as far as I'm aware, Tagashi does a pretty good job of aligning other politics other than Japanese politics within his work. So he did a pretty good job so far. It's just a language translation difference. So every time you see something that's slightly different and it's like, what's going on with that? Just know it means one thing. It's just going to be named something else because translating one language to English is going to be a little bit hard. I speak from experience because sometimes I have to translate certain things from French to English. It's not easy. Certain things are just going to look a little wonky, but it means the same thing. So the reference is the current head of the Glam clan, aka their mayor, was featured in page 45. That's one of the small indicators of the government in hand for the Hunter x Hunter manga in and of itself, which is technically the example given is the pre-canon. Another example would be the government's working and aligning with like the Hunter Association, right? So that's probably more of an example of the federal and how that tends to happen. So let's say, for example, you have the U.S.S. government calling the Hunter Association for whatever reason. That would be the federal government calling them. And then you have the states try and figure out how to accommodate the issue for the local people of said state, right? So if Glam Glassland has a certain issue, then the first to be called would be the clan leaders, aka the mayors and everybody else within the local government. They will be the first to be called, and then after, if it really is a federal issue, they'll be appointing the federal. So they will call the federal and be like, yeah, what do we do about this? Yeah, this is beyond our jurisdiction. This is beyond local. This is federal. So that's how things tend to be done. right? So that checks and balances, again, is something that tends to be evaluated within the Hunter Hunter universe as well. So that's one of the small indicators and examples. There's not too many examples because the majority of issues was not within York New or Glam Glassland at all. So I can't say too much about it. The only example that I can also give would be, for example, it was either York New or election. I'm pretty sure it was with the election arc, right? They indicated that essentially Alumi was doing some weird stuff, right? During that time. So what happened? The local government of York New basically was like, hey, yeah, we need to do something. Call the Hunter Association. So they called the Hunter Association for York New, and they were like, hey, there's something going on. Yeah, some weird stuff going on. How do we solve this? So the Hunter Association also works with the governments at hand, and with the U.S.S, who's the first to call? Most likely it would be a local government rather than the entire state, aka the federal government of the U.S.S. But that's one small indication of how it would work within the Hunter universe and how it compares to our world. All right, guys, I will now see you for another Secession Monday. This pretty much concludes the end of this conversation, and I hope that you understand at least a little bit of how the U.S.S. works, unfortunately and fortunately, and I will see you next time. And that marks the end of another Secession Monday. Now, my podcast members, unfortunately, this is very sad news to bring to you all, but it's news that's very important. This will be the last public episode of Secession Monday because we are moving to Patreon/Ko-fi. So now we're going to be having exclusive conversations because the very next topic, if you couldn't tell already, due to the nature of this podcast episode, we're going to be gearing more towards serious political discussions in which it's going to be heavier than usual. And there's a lot that I want to say, but I can't say so publicly, especially on YouTube, considering the censorship is a lot heavier. And I want to make sure that you guys understand everything. With platforms like Patreon and Ko-fi, I can more so openly speak. If you have the monetization or the money to essentially access the platform, the lowest subscription accounts for, I believe, either $3 to $4, the highest maybe being $5. If you're on Ko-fi, you can access it. The lowest, I believe, is $3, the highest being $8, depending on what tier you want to. We'll talk more later, and there will be a commercial pretty soon on TikTok that explains all the tiers for Patreon and Ko-fi so that you can understand the platform in and of itself, and you can understand it so that you can later access all of the podcast episodes that you need for Secession Monday. The next conversation, when we come back to Secession Monday, we are going to be talking about imperialism and the Khaken Empire anyways, right? So we're basically going to circle back into conversations about the U.S.S. and the Khaken Empire because we're going to be discussing the impact of imperialism within the Hunter Hunter universe. All right, guys, I hope that you have a very, very great morning, and please remember again to like and subscribe. For my members who essentially are accessing the free episodes, you liking, you following, you sharing is also a beautiful thing that you're doing. Everybody has an important role when it comes to building the council. I appreciate everybody here very greatly, and I want to show that appreciation every single day. So for those of you that are not essentially a part of the legislative branch, aka my more so paid members, but you're still accessing the podcast by listening to it, right? By sharing it with your friends, by liking the episodes. You're important, you're appreciated, and you are loved as well. I thank you for every single moment that you give this podcast attention. And I hope to bring many more blessings. And I hope that you guys continue to do what you do, which is support everything about the podcast. Truly, guys, I thank you for what has happened throughout the years so far. And I hope to continue and grow the council even more than what it already is. Please make sure to follow me on all social platforms, even if you're not able to access the Patreon and Ko-fi for whatever reason. You following me on all other platforms is a beautiful thing that you are also doing. Just know that you are still appreciated, even if you can't access the Patreon episodes for the time being. That is okay. We still have plenty of activities here for everybody. The normal analyzations, especially the character analysis that's currently going on, will still be released to all of the public. And again, you are appreciated and loved. I hope that you have a very beautiful, grand morning, and I will see you on the next Secession Monday.